beginning at verse 21. Jesus began to say to them, "Today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his mouth. They looked at each other and said, "Isn't this Joseph's boy?" They are so proud. This is their hometown hero. They have heard the stories from the other towns where Jesus taught, and now he is here with them back home. But Jesus, not satisfied to bask in their praise, goes on speaking. He continues on to push forward his mission. And that's when the manure hits the ventilator. He said to all the people who were sitting there with him, "Doubtless you will quote me this proverb, 'Physician, heal thyself.' And you will say, 'Do here also in your own hometown the things that we have heard you have done at Capernaum.' Jesus said, 'Truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in his own hometown. The truth is, there were many widows in Israel in the time of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up for 3 years and 6 months, and there was a severe famine over all the land. And yet Elijah was sent to none of them, except the widow of Zarephath in Sidon. There were also many lepers in Israel at the time of the prophet Elisha. None of them were cleansed, except Naaman, the Syrian." The people sitting in the synagogue that morning are becoming less proud after hearing these words, and angry. Not just, "Who does he think he is? He's getting too big for his britches. I remember when I changed his diaper," kind of angry, but really scary kind of angry. When they heard all this, all in the synagogue were filled with rage. They got up and drove him out to the edge of town and led him to the brow of a cliff on which their town was built, so that they might hurl him off the cliff. But Jesus passed through the midst of them and went on his way. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Jesus has come home. But he's trying to tell them, his people, his own people, probably his relatives, his cousins and aunts and uncles, that they don't own him. Jesus comes home to tell them that God's love is not exclusively to and for them. That they don't have a hook on Jesus. And in fact, God's grace and love is for all. Even outsiders who live in Sidon and in Syria. The enemies. That God's love is for the unclean and the outcast and forgotten, and the people don't like it much at all. And he tells them this using stories that he probably learned there in that synagogue from them. I imagine his Sunday school teachers were present that morning when he started in. The story of Elijah and the widow who fed Elijah, and of the widow's son, whom Elijah restored to life. The widow who was not a faithful Jew, but a foreigner, but whom God cared for anyway. And Jesus, I'm sure, also heard the story of Naaman the Syrian, whom Elisha cured of leprosy by having him wash in the Jordan River. Another outsider, another Gentile, another other. I have a friend who, whenever she is reminded of God's abundant grace and mercy, says, "Oh, that is just so God of God." But the people gathered there that morning, hearing Jesus' words, are not thinking that. What they are thinking is that Jesus has just gone too far, that he has upset the apple cart, that he is messing things up for them, that he has left off preaching and gone on to meddling. I said to you earlier, I don't like change. We usually don't like change. I don't like it when all I want to do is run into Walmart and buy a loaf of bread and go home, and they have rearranged the shelves yet again, and still again I cannot find where the bread is, and I have to spend an extra 20 minutes when all I want to do is get in, get my bread, and go home. We don't like change in the church. When the world around us is changing so much and so fast, we would like at least one place for 1 hour a week to stay the same. People who study change say that we don't fear change so much as we fear the loss that will happen in that change. And the hard part about that is sometimes we can't even name what that loss is. We only know we don't want to go through it. I see this in congregations a lot. Virtually every congregation everywhere says that they want to change to attract young families and they want the church to grow. But when it comes down to it, we resist that change, or at least the changes that we would need to make to attract those families and those outsiders. Perhaps it would be services that are not on Sunday morning. Perhaps it is worship that is much more about responding to where God calls us out in the community, in this time, in this place, rather than where we were and the way we used to be in, pick a year, 1963, 1983, 2003. We miss those days. But church has always been a place of change. God has always been about change. We say that if we are in Christ, we are a new creation altogether. The old is gone. Behold, a new creation has now come. God's very first act is an action of change. In Genesis, we are told the darkness hovered over the waters, and the world was void and without form, and God said, light. And there was light, which was change. If we read the book of Acts, or if we look at any of the letters of Paul, we can see how much the early church struggled with the changes they were going through. And this church was founded in 1874. You all know that. How much has the world changed since 1874? And yet, faithful people are still here now. That is the heart of successful change, that we hold on to what is foundational as we go forward into the future. I don't know if you've been watching the show on Netflix or have heard about it, about Marie Kondo, or her book that came out a couple years ago about the magic of tightening up. She says that having too many things gets in the way of our life. And she has a way of dealing with that. One of the things you do is you take everything of one category, books or clothes or dishes or whatever, kids' toys, whatever. If it's clothes, you gather all the clothes from every closet, from every drawer, everywhere, pile them all on your bed. And that includes all the single socks that are tucked in the back of the drawer, and the t-shirt from 1973 that you got at a concert that should be a dust rag, but you somehow cannot give it up. And her answer is, you take each object, and you look at it and you ask, does this spark joy for me? And if the answer is no, you get rid of it responsibly. I understand that now is a really good time to go shopping at Goodwill or Salvation Army because people are getting rid of a lot of stuff because of her work. I feel like this is a work the church needs to do with our stuff, surely, but also with our traditions, our assumptions, our sacred cows, our way of being the church. That we need to ask that question, but not, does this spark joy for me? But does this give life? Does this enable us, whatever that thing is, does this enable us to live out our mission that God is calling us to? When Jesus went back home and preached in his home congregation, he wasn't telling the people that God did not love them anymore. Rather, he wanted them to see that God's love is so expansive, so abundant, so unending that walls are being torn down and the tent is being stretched wide to allow more people in. That God's love has no end. That foundation remains the same even though everything else around us is changing. So my question is, in every congregation I've ever worked with, what do we need to keep and hold on to? And what do we need to let go of in order to live out God's expansive and abundant love for the world? When Jesus spoke to his congregation, he said, today, this scripture has been fulfilled. And that was true that day in that synagogue in Nazareth, but it is still true today. Today is when God is acting. Today is when God is calling us. Today is when we join with Christ and say, the Spirit of the Lord is upon us. Today, as the church gathered here, and as the church that God is calling us to be in this place, sharing God's abundant and amazing and inclusive and life-changing love, as we live out the mission that God is calling us to. Amen.